Hey, Donnie's the one that did it.
I don't believe you guys. Oh, should I just wait? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. See, the reason why. That's what she gotta say. Hold on.
Let's watch Liquid Room. One more victim. No.
Everybody's like, no. I don't want that.
It's a color.
These are really good microphones there.
I'm sorry, one of our panelists is holding us up here.
No?
No? No?
Okay, no, it's okay. Let me try.
Can you guys share?
Yeah.
Okay. I know, I do those kind of, it's fun.
Great, thank you.
Anytime. Ami hamataki api. Chante washte an chizapelo. Chetan washte machi api. Mitinakak Indian tribe of New York na Oglala Lakota Himacha. Good afternoon, my friends, my relatives. My name is Don Ragona. My Lakota name is Goodhawk. I'm an enrolled member of the Mitinakak Indian tribe of New York, and I'm also Oglala Lakota. I'm the Director of Development and House Counsel for the Native American Rights Fund, and I want to thank For Directions, the Potawatomi Hotel, Resort and Casino, and the Potawatomi Tribe for hosting us here today. Before we begin, I want to just talk a little bit about the organization that I represent, and that's the Native American Rights Fund. So for those of you who don't know, the Native American Rights Fund was founded in 1970, and led by our executive director, John Echohawk. We're the largest premier Native legal organization that has, for the past 54 years, provided legal representation and advice on major issues of importance to Indian tribes, Native organizations, and individuals nationwide who might otherwise have gone without adequate representation. NARF has successfully asserted and defended the most important rights of Indians and tribes in hundreds of major cases and has achieved significant results in critical areas such as tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, natural resource protection, Indian education, and voting rights. NARF's main headquarters is in Boulder, Colorado, where we just recently moved into new offices. Washington, D.C., and Anchorage, Alaska is the areas that we have our two satellite offices. One of the major areas of focus for NARF is the protection of Native human rights, and the right to vote and to participate in the democratic process is also a human right. In 2013, the United States Supreme Court invalidated an entire voting rights section, and NARF and other civil rights groups took action and founded the Native American Voting Rights Coalition. The coalition's sole purpose at that time was to work on a congressional amendment that would restore protections for minority voters, as well as reviewing the laws of many states who have enacted laws that could impact the ability of Native people to vote or even register to vote. Since then, NAVRAC has grown into much, much more. Over the past several years, we've seen more and more efforts on the part of state legislatures to interfere with our rights as United States citizens to register to vote or to actually interfere with the very act of voting itself. This is not only happening to Native people, but also to other communities of color who are experiencing similar issues. Today, we're living in a time where it seems more and more like American democracy is sliding towards minority rule, and you don't have to think long or hard to figure out why. Additionally, as more and more Native people and people of color are beginning to run for public office, we're hearing that they too are having to climb over obstacles that are being placed in their paths as they try to run for public office, or if they just even try to register to vote or participate in the act of voting itself. Our panel today will be highlighting some of these issues, the obstacles these folks are facing, and hopefully introduce some strategies on how we can push back against the effort to suppress our rights as American citizens to participate in the political process. Joining to me today is our panel, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is O.J. Siemens. I'm the co-executive director of For Directions, along with my wife Barbara, sitting over there, who is actually the boss of For Directions. I am part of the Native American Rights Coalition, but you know, I will tell you, as for Directions, we are the only Native national organization that is actually headquartered on a reservation, and which makes a big difference because, you know, we understand, you know, what happens every day in Indian country, not because we heard about it, but because we live it. And we also are able to see how the states and the counties treat our people, not only for voting, but for even things like roads or our schools. So that's where I'm from, and I'm turning over to Janine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janine Abrams McLean. I'm the president at Fair Count. We are a nonpartisan, a nonprofit organization that focuses on civic engagement and protecting our democracy. We focus on 3 pillars of democracy: census, voting, and redistricting. And we are based in Georgia, but we do national work. We are really big on being thoughtful and active partners. We've been, you know, so a lot of our national work comes from our partnerships with organizations like For Directions, like Native American Rights Fund, and other groups across the country. And I'm really excited to be here today.
Gamada venti venya pramul Licio Ortega, mapipanyanyum nyats kamanskwatan, and nipshramul nahar. My name is Licio Ortega. I am from the Quetzal people, born for the Turtle Clan. I'm the vice president at Thunderbird Strategic. We are a DC-based American Indian-owned government relations and strategic communications firm. I have been a voting advocate for several years, and during the previous election, I had the honor of serving as the first ever Vice President of External Affairs at the National Congress of American Indians, where we were able to implement a nationwide strategy to start capacity building for different regions across Indian country so that we could not only work on census, but getting out the native vote. So I'm very thankful to be here. Yaha.
Great, thank you, panel. Well, let's get started. All of you have either worked with people who are running for office or have ran for office yourselves, or have been told by your community members that they've run into obstacles in just being able to vote or even registering to vote. So that being said, 2-part question. One is, what are the barriers that each of you, your community, or the candidates that you've worked with faced in order to participate in the electoral process? And the second part is, how are you and or they overcoming those barriers?
Thank you for that question. Being a voting rights activist advocate started in my tribal community. So one of the things that I started doing as a young person was starting to understand why only a small percentage of our tribal citizens were voting in our tribal elections. So I helped to found a nonprofit news organization within our community that ended up getting an FCC license and turning into a radio station where we could really start talking about Native issues in our community. And we would host localized events where we would bring our community together so we could really, over music, food, dancing, and different types of cultural opportunities, discuss what was important to us. Then we started inviting our tribal council candidates in to talk about their platforms so that we could really understand their fitness to serve on our tribal council. And once we got more active voters within the community, I started to work closer with our tribal council, and I'm currently serving my 3rd term as a legislator within my community to ensure that we understand the most pressing issues within our community that our tribal council should and could prioritize, which then sort of expands out to the more statewide coalitions and national coalitions that focus on these issues too. And that also sort of created a pathway where we would need to narrow down and power map. So power mapping is an exercise where you understand who makes the decisions, who has the power, and who do you need to influence in some of these really important issues. So we were having issues in our education system, we were having issues with our water rights, we were having issues just negotiating various jurisdictional issues with policing, and part of my reservation is in California, Public Law 280 state. We had county officers that would not necessarily have, the right or even, enough information to come into our reservation and, interrogate or, be trying to apprehend folks, but they would do it anyway. And so we really had to start getting involved in water boards, going to city council meetings, having conversations with a variety of local, state, and federal officials so that we could start addressing these issues that we were having in our own community. And then working at the national level, I realized that tribal communities across Indian country were having some of the same issues. And so working with a national organization that has regional focus, it was very important to ensure that we were saying where we could unify and ensure that we were advocating in DC to members of Congress so we could start making changes at the federal level, and then all the way down to the state level, and then ensuring that our tribal leaders were equipped to work on the state level.
Yes, so I am from the South. So I was born and raised in Mississippi. I went to school and worked in North Carolina. I went to school in Texas, and now I live in Georgia. And one thing that I can say about the South is that the South is the incubator for a lot of voter suppression tactics. My sister Stacey Abrams actually started another organization called Fair Fight that specifically focused on identifying and combating voter suppression tactics across the country. And I think that when we look at Black communities and Black and brown communities in the South, when I talk about it being this sort of incubator, a lot of these ideas and strategies are tested out and refined in the South, and then you see them implemented elsewhere in the United States. One of the things that I'm happy about the work that our sister organization, Fair Fight, does, and other groups on the ground, we're a nonpartisan group, but is that we're able to educate people about these voter suppression tactics. And we also, at Fair Count, we focus, like our North Star is the census. I was really excited today to hear someone bring up the census in one of the earlier panels, and I had a discussion over lunch about the census as well. And we also talk about census suppression. When you look at the race and ethnic groups that are undercounted in the census, you are looking at Black, Hispanic, and the highest, or the group that had the highest undercount were Native Americans living on reservations in 2020. And we think so much about voting, but we also have to start thinking about the census, because that is under attack. Even for the one in 2030, it's to keep these numbers low, because that impacts how the lines are drawn for voting districts, and that in turn impacts our ability to vote. And so one of the things, again, that Fair Count does is that we educate people. Our organizers and our teams, we call them democracy academies, where we talk about all three pillars of democracy. And even this many years out, we're already talking to people about census and redistricting. And I think as you educate people and you connect the dots for folks, it makes it much easier for them to identify challenges, but also we give them strategies to overcome those challenges.
Great, thanks, Janine.
We started out, basically, we weren't for directions. We started out back in 2018, and what we saw was we had the majority of people on our reservation, and yet we did not control the school board. And so what we started doing was Barb and I would go out, and and then you had to have the document notarized, which is pretty tough in any country. And so we would go out and actually, in a van, have a judge with us who was a notary, and pull people into the van and get them to register to vote. And we did that, and what we saw was we were able to get the majority of the school board to be natives. and that made a big difference. Once we did that, then we got into a campaign. Senator Tim Johnson, God bless his soul, he just passed away last week. But Barb ran the actual partisan campaign for the Democratic Party in Indian Country in South Dakota. And we worked pretty hard, or Barb worked pretty hard. I always remember the first time that they brought people to the reservation to help with the campaign, they brought a bunch of white people. And they had they're all wearing the black pants and the white shirt, and they went up to Barb and said, what you're doing, you're not doing it right, and we need to, up the game. So Barb said, I'm gonna let you do it for one day. And so they loaded up the van and went door to door, and every door they knocked, either nobody would answer or the back door would run out, because anybody dressed like that in Indian Country, you're either FBI, U.S. Marshals, or a Mormon. And so nobody would answer the doors. They'd all take off. And so after they had zero people that day, they came back and talked to Barb. And so what she did is she made all of the white people that came, she made them the chauffeurs for the Indians. And so what they would do is drive the Indians around, and then the Indians would take and knock on the door, because, they're all relatives, so we knew who they are, and we were able to bring them in and then take them. At that time, you only had 30 days. It quit, voter registration quit 30 days before. We didn't have early voting, but we within a month registered about 600 new voters. And on election day, they, at close of polls at 7, at 8 o'clock, and this is John Thune, who is now a leader within the Republican Party, was running against Tim Johnson. And when they were going to bed, Tim Johnson was thinking about giving his, speech saying that, congratulations, Senator Johnson, because he was 3,700 votes behind. And there was only 2 counties left, and that was, at that time, it was Shannon County, but it was called Oglala. It's now called Oglala Lakota County. And there was Todd County, which is a Rosebud Sioux Indian reservation. And so they figured 2 counties, there's no way he's going to make up 3,700 votes. He got up in the morning and found out he won by 524 votes. And that was Indian Country. The 90 to 95% of the people on both those reservations were Indian. So he pulled out over 4,200 votes from Indian Country within that time. One of the things that we also did is we challenged it, because they opened their office late, so we challenged that, and we got an hour extra voting because of their opening late. And we kept track on an hourly basis, and we saw that we got 500, in that last hour, we got 530 votes that went there. And so in the morning he won and stuff, and we were invited to the party. And what we saw there was that all the campaign managers, the different people, they were called up on stage and they were given star quilts, and and it's funny when you see white people give star quilts away, but that's another story. But that's when we decided that we were going to create 4 Directions, because what happened was we saw where our tribal members came out, they made a difference, and yet they weren't recognized. And we looked at past history of natives showing up, and we saw moving forward that what we needed to do is create an organization that we as an organization didn't get the credit, but the tribes and the tribal members would get the credit. And that's when we formed 4 Directions 20 years ago. And we've been going all over the country on voter registration, getting out the vote, because we thought it would be easy just to, do a GOTV. It wasn't. They came up with so many, they say it's fair because it's all the way across the board, But when they go all the way across the board and they say it's fair, first of all, they don't put in poverty. Second, they don't put in transportation. And then third, they don't put in distance. And so they make these laws saying it's equal to everybody when they know that the only ones actually affected are people of color. And like Janine said, they practice in the South and they brought it up north. And South Dakota is now known as Mississippi of the North. I mean, just because they adopted so many regulations. So that is what's really going on here. You know, we've actually worked with people running for office, but we also found that while trying to do so, there are so many barriers and so many new laws that take effect. And one more thing I want to touch on that Janine touched on, census. Census and redistricting is key to actually winning. And if we do not do it and we do not participate and we do not force ourselves within the census, we're going to spend another 10 years after 2030 trying to gain more ground. Yep. Thanks.
Great, thanks. You know, before we get to the next question, I'm just noticing a couple of common themes. Is number one is educating your communities on the importance. But a second piece of that is that that's only effective if it's community members educating their own community members. That people from the outside don't have that same effect. If anything, it could have the opposite effect because of what you were saying. They think you're a Fed or a Mormon or whatever coming and knocking on the door. So,
And Don, if I could just touch on that, it's about having trusted voices,
Right.
right? And sometimes, and depending on the community, that trusted voice could look like you, but it could also just be somebody who doesn't look like you, but has put the time and the effort to listen to you and to act based on what you've said. And so I think it's very important that we uplift trusted voices and that we support them. But that's exactly it. If there's communities, if I walk into, you don't know who the heck I am, why would you listen to me, right? And so I think especially when we're thinking about like the youth and the future of our communities, that's another opportunity to start making them trusted voices and to get them out in the communities so that they can talk to their peers, but then as they get older, they're already established in the community, so people will listen to them.
and that's a perfect segue into our next question.
Okay, here you go.
So thank you. So in light of all these barriers that you had mentioned, did you want to say something? I'm sorry. I see OJ keeps putting the microphone.
Well, I think that another theme is the census. And I think just, we're here.
Right.
We're talking about Indian country. We're talking about voting counts. Indian country has historically had the highest undercount in the census, nearly double to the next population. Historically, they wanted to ensure we didn't count. And there was a calculated effort in 2018 among communities, Black, Brown, like they're just saying, we are going to take this back. We are going to take this over. We are going to make sure we're in charge of this. And that's how we really got to start working together and saying, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make sure that there are enough resources? Who is going to be in charge of tapping those trusted messengers, educating those trusted messengers, making sure the Census Bureau was on board with our strategies and not letting it stay in the hands of the Census Bureau at that point in time. And as much effort as we made to do that, the Census Bureau still did their own thing. And sitting across the table from the Census Bureau and them telling us, I'm sorry that we didn't translate that commercial in the proper language is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. And also hearing that they were only gonna sort of invest in getting enumerators out to our communities, and this was before the pandemic hit. We had to have advocates cross-community standing up for one another and saying, regardless of what budget you put forward, that's not enough. If you're really going to do this the right way, you're gonna need to do it our way. And this is the way in which we're saying we need to do it. And then the pandemic hit. So we had to reassess our own landscapes within our own communities to figure out how we were actually going to reach our hardest to count communities, which made it even worse. And so while the 2020 census gave us some higher numbers, a higher count, we see the numbers getting better with count, it's still an undercount, which means that it is affecting our federal funding. It is affecting the programs that we're able to have for and with our communities. And it's continuing to light the fire cross community to make sure we're all standing together and saying, okay, we know what we want to do. Do you know what you need to do? Do you know that, do you know what kind of investments need to be made? And I want to shout out, and I hope Sue Van from Coulter Foundation is watching, because she has kept her ear to the street to ensure that there is resources and there is funding and there is collaboration between various conveners, cross-community, cross-culturally, so that we're always talking to each other and naming our needs at the table, because census is where it starts and voting is the second layer of all of that. So that's all I'll say about that.
So let me ask you this, before I actually get on to the next question I was gonna ask. You all mentioned about that outreach to community. Now, those of us that have come from tribal communities, we've heard the reasons why people haven't voted in the past. But, and they're gonna be different than other communities as well. So I'm just kind of curious. So you had mentioned some, let's see, from your community, OJ and excuse me, OJ and Janine, can you kind of let us know what are some of the reasons when you talk to your own community members, do you meet with that kind of resistance, and what do you say to overcome that?
Well, in 2022, or after the 2022 midterms, Fair Count did a study called Midterm Motivations in Georgia, where we talked to, I think, over 300 voters in Georgia. We did focus groups, we did surveys, and we did one-on-one conversations. And some of the top lines that came out of there, one of the main ones that came out for why people didn't vote in the midterm, was that they didn't see how democracy and voting was relevant in their lives. Right? I have a friend named Teppo. She does some work in rural South Africa. And one of the things she says is that we talk about democracy all the time, but for most people, democracy doesn't put food on the table. Democracy doesn't pay bills. Democracy doesn't pay for daycare. It's not something that people see in their everyday lives. And that was a sentiment that we got out of our midterm motivation study, specifically for Georgia, but I think that it resonates with a lot of people across the country. And so to combat that, right, is, again, you have to talk to people to make them understand how democracy and how voting impacts their daily lives. But before you can talk to them, you have to actually listen to them. Because I think a lot of times we can do 38 studies and I can still go talk to somebody and nothing I say will resonate with them. But if I take the time and the effort to have a conversation and you tell me that you don't vote because you still have $800,000 in student loans, or you don't vote because you've been applying for jobs for the past 2 years and you still haven't gotten anything, or you do have a job, but to be able to pay all your bills and take care of your family, you have to have 3 of them. Those are the types of conversations that will let me know, now let me tell you how you voting can impact can impact that particular thing in your life. But again, it starts with actually listening to people instead of just walking into communities and telling people what you think they need to hear. You need to listen to them and then make it relevant and use that to encourage them to vote. And I'll just say one more story. I have a friend who is, a black male and is adamant about not voting in this election. And this was before the change and after the change. And, and part of the way I was able to kind of even get a crack in the surface of him being like, I'm just not voting, was I was like, okay, we could talk all the time. I understand why you don't want to vote, but there are so many black men and women and people of color across this country who have lost their right to vote due to felony disenfranchisement. I said, if you don't want to vote for them, vote or vote for yourself, vote by proxy for them. You know that at least one of those folks out there is has lost their right to vote, maybe over some trumped up, weed charges or something, right? Vote in their stead. And that was one of the first times where he didn't immediately tell me, no, I'm not going to vote. And so I think but I had to take hundreds of conversations that I've had with him and be like, let me just try this one thing to see if it might put a little chink in his armor. And I think it worked, but I had to listen first.
Nice, nice. OJ, you heard what Janine is dealing with in her communities and what Licia is dealing with hers. Is it similar or different than what they're experiencing up in South Dakota?
First, I want to jump back to census because it's important. Real quick. And again, this is with Sue's funding. What we did is we had 20 communities, or 9 reservations, and then those reservations had different communities. We went to the reservations with little bitty laptops. And we sat down and in South Dakota on our 9 reservations, we helped 300 plus natives apply for the census job. And this is in all the state of South Dakota, and none of them were hired. I mean, that's, why we're having problems. I mean, in Nevada, we had to fight them, but we finally got them to allow us to have tribal members go with them to show them where people lived and knock on the doors. So, that I think is really important because, again, that hurt our count, which hurts our redistricting, which hurts our voting. But getting to your question, yes, in a lot of ways, but you also have to look at this, and this is brought up. Voter suppression, isn't just in, the governor's office. It's not just in the legislatures. It could be that table right there when you're walking in, and the person sitting there will look at you and say, wrong table. And then in South Dakota, here's what happens. You'll see a farmer or rancher come in, and they'll spend 15 minutes just visiting and whatnot and say, oh, here, let me go get you your form. And then a native will come in and go, oh, this is not your table. You'll probably have to go somewhere else. I mean, just that right there would stop that native from ever coming back. And so what we did is we found out in different, whatever state we're in, our counties, some of them were in order to be an election judge, you had to have be a part of the Democrat Party or a part of the Republican Party. So we went to the reservations and we took over on the local parties, whether it was Republican or Democrat, and then we turned around and we picked the poll workers that were native and put them there. And so in some places, like in Nevada, when we sued them, we made it part that the poll workers were going to be native on that reservation. And so it's not just trying to convince somebody to vote, but being able to provide them that opportunity when they get there, not have a problem to vote. Because a lot of times, they won't admit it, but a lot of times they won't vote because they felt so uncomfortable. And the other thing you have to look at is when the vote is held. It's held usually in the, what is the first week of Tuesday.
Yeah, first Tuesday in November.
Okay, now you got to remember this was created hundreds of years ago where the farmers got their crops in. And they decided that this would be a perfect time because all the farmers and ranchers back there, all the forefathers, would be able to set down their deal and go vote, okay? Now what happens the first week of every month? We have our social programs. We have, individuals that receive their veterans benefits. We have people getting their Social Security. You know, we have people that actually, you know, get GA or get their food stamps. And you think that a person that has to look 30 days ahead that gets their VA payment, veterans benefits, is going to rush to vote? Or is he going or she going to take and go to the store and pay their bill that they had to charge up to survive that 30 days? Or that is never taken into consideration when it comes to voting. And that's why we really fight hard for early in-person registered voting to, first of all, get the ones that will vote there, and then work on the ones that won't vote, you know, during the course of all of it. But I think in Indian country it's a little different, only because when we start talking about our voting, we talk about a document that was signed between our nations and the United States government. And the only people that actually can affect that document, which is our treaties, is Congress, and which is the House and the Senate. And I think once we're able to explain the fights that we're going through in Indian country, first of all, even turning fee land into trust. I mean, that was stopped for 4 years just because we did not turn out to vote. There are things that happen within any administration that can totally annihilate a reservation. If you remember, they actually terminated reservations back in the early 60s, and to this day, some of those tribes are still not tribes. And even during, I can think back Clinton, maybe one tribe would get back in. But there are consequences for not participating if you're an Indian. Because the fact is that our lands, our sovereignty, and our treaties are always on the line at every election. I'll be quiet.
That's yours.
No, that's good. That's good. Yeah, it's really important, and I think for Indian country, that's a real key issue, is the fact that I think we've all heard it from our grandparents or whoever, parents, that, oh, why should you vote? Don't vote, you're a tribal member, right? Vote in your own tribal elections. Don't vote in state elections. Don't vote in federal. Because I think there was a feeling that it diminished our tribal sovereignty in some way, when in actuality, for the points that you just made, OJ, which were right on point, it helps strengthen our tribal sovereignty. Because the way things are now, our tribal sovereignty is kind of hangs by a thread at the whim of individuals that if they don't feel beholding to us, then they don't have to vote for us or advocate for our interests. So those are good points.
Well, I guess here's what I would add to that is the fact that we're all warrior societies. And we are now every day battling to protect our treaties and our sovereignty. But the way it is now, we don't need bows and arrows. We don't need guns. Right. We just need a pen, make a mark, and that way we are going to take and win this battle over and over and over again.
Exactly. Same warrior mentality, different battlefield. So let me ask you guys this. You've all talked about what's going on in your own communities, the issues, the challenges, the struggles. But it's kind of siloed, right? When we just think about that. So in light of all these barriers that you mentioned, in light of the tactics that you've all described being used against your own particular communities, it's obviously affecting communities of all color. Now, we've had other panels before, and we've had members of the Asian community, the Hispanic community, and we're hearing very similar things from them as well. So that being the case, how can organizations of color like the ones that you're representing, how do we work together to overcome these barriers, and how do we support each other as we're looking towards not just this election, but the midterms coming up in 2026 and beyond?
Well, I think I'll get us started because there's something missing here in Wisconsin, our youth. We haven't heard a youth voice here, and I am not a young person, but I do work with a lot of young people who are looking for solidarity and unity in a moment where there's a ton of crises going on across the board. Back in 2018, 2019, we were at this upslope. In 2020, we saw this reckoning happened. We were able to have a couple of wins in the middle of that reckoning. There was a lot of solidarity that was happening. We had the Washington football team changed their mascot during that time. But the only reason they did it was because we hit them in their pocket. We started to advocate together across communities to say, this is an old way of thinking that no longer works for the current society. And a lot of these movements are being led by young people, young voices. And I think that the current moment of solidarity is around the war in Gaza. It's bringing a lot of communities together, and the one thing that I'm hearing from a lot of young people is that the way in which this democracy has to change is that they are unsure about the two-party system. What are the other options? Evolving the options and being able to still work within the options that currently exist. So kind of to the last question that you asked in terms of what are some of the issues on a national scale, climate and environment are huge, and I think that the crux of the war in Gaza is about extractive industry. So we all have feelings about how climate and climate change is affecting our communities from the Gulf South, which is predominantly Black and brown communities, to Indian country where lithium mining is currently happening, and a lot of the young people are standing on the front lines of these issues here. So, and they're bringing in a lot of other communities with them to say, like, how do we stand together in solidarity? All of our issues matter together. So what is the solution to that? The solution is that movements are moving together. And we're always cross-talking with other communities to ask what issues are most important. And we're really doubling down on supporting those issues. You know, we saw communities come out en masse for the murder of George Floyd. And that was really this moment in time where we said, your issues, Black Lives Matter, Black issues are national issues. Indian issues are national issues. They are not siloed to a community. They are national issues because we're all living in this space together, and we're in a moment where we get to carve out what this next generation actually looks like, and we're standing at the line that we all just need to get over here. So who are going to be the voices that get us there? And I think we have a lot of younger folks that are feeling more empowered to run for office, and with programs like Advanced Native Political Leadership in Indian country, there's more investment and more time being put into readying our candidates. I think the number is something like we need to fill 16,000 seats to achieve parity in this political system so that we have accurate representation from Indigenous communities. And we can't do that alone, you know, so we have a couple of folks in the Midwest that have done a couple of things. Anthony Tamez is one of my favorite folks to talk about out of Chicago. He's a young person that's actually sitting on a policing board. He's Black and Indigenous. He was born and raised in Chicago, and he was invested in by Advanced Native Political Leadership and brought in through his work in the Black community. So there's a lot of cross-cultural ties there. There's a lot of work in just speaking our issues out loud and continuing to convene like this and making space for each other like this. In Arizona, when we had our forum there, we were talking with the Asian American Pacific Islander community where they said, well, we just had a conversation on climate. We just had a conversation on policing. We just had a conversation on housing issues. So next time we need to make sure that there's somebody represented from all the communities, because those issues are not individual issues, those are cross-community issues. So continuing to think about the issues cross-culturally is probably a step one, and we're already there. We're already speaking with each other about these things, and we just need to make sure that when the moment comes and we tap on each other's shoulder and say, come with us, this is what we're doing right now, this is who's leading us, this is the candidate that makes the most sense for us. It's not a lot of times, you know, in Indian country, we've heard it, there's no D's and R's, there's I for Indian, so who's gonna champion our Indian issues? And we also need to do the same thing when we're thinking cross-community as well.
Definitely. I think we need to get out of our own way. You know, there is a lot of, like what you were just saying is, you know, you have these silos. We talked about this over here. We talked about the same thing over here. Let's talk about it together. A lot of communities of color, we have a shared history of oppression, but also a shared future of prosperity. And the way that we get to that is by working with one another. I'm a part of an international democracy fellowship called KESAB that works with democracy organizations from the US, South Africa, and Brazil. And we're learning from each other, right? There's no conversation saying, oh, it's so bad, it's much worse in Brazil than it is in the US, or wait a minute, did you not see what was going on in South Africa? We don't have these conversations. Instead, we're talking about, this worked in South Africa. Let me see if I can bring that over here to the United States. And I think that we need to do the same thing within the United States and within our different organizations. Let's have a conversation. Let's see what works best. I've stolen some stuff from OJ. I don't tell him, but some of his strategies, I use them. And so it's, you know, I think I'll give you credit one day. But, but seriously, I think we have to learn from one another and not be afraid to try something different, to experiment, to see what types of things are effective in multiple places. And then I'm just gonna bring it down a little bit, you know, to a more granular level. Within a specific state, we have to get out of our scarcity mentality, meaning that and Don, you talked about this earlier about like the minuscule amount, the minuscule fraction of funding that goes to Native American organizations through philanthropy. You see the same thing in other groups of color. Not that bad, though. I will give you, but you see that. And I think that we have this scarcity mentality where it is, oh, wait a minute, we're talking about the same topic. I have to fight you to get this money from this funder, because if you do it, then I can't do it, or you're taking from me. And so I think if we get out of that mentality and we actually work together and we go to funders and say, hey, y'all talk all this stuff about multiracial coalitions. The way you do it is you fund all of us so that we can get this done. And so, yeah, get out of our own way, get out of that scarcity mentality, and actually learn from one another.
Great, thank you.
You know, we were here just before, first of all, Four Directions came here when there was going to be an election for a Supreme Court justice. And we were here during the midterms, and there was a judgeship open in which Native was running for. And so when we came here and we did a forum, we had Supreme Court Justice that was a candidate come in. You know, one of the things she said was, you know, normally when I deal with Native Americans or tribes, you're a data mark on a briefing. But being able, and we had elders, tribal leaders there, we had youth there, being able to communicate with you and talk to you, you're no longer a data point. You are somebody that I can recognize as a human, and I can tell you, listening to your stories, if there's ever a issue coming before me, I can't promise you how I will vote, but I can promise you that I am listening to you as a person. And after that, the election happened, and we were going, doing the get out to vote in Wisconsin. And so I called Janine. I said, I need help. She said, what do you need? Can you do the texting for us? She said, yeah, give us the messages. We'll send the texts out. We have the people, you know, we have the technology to do it. I said, great. And then now, can you tell us where our people are living? I mean, people are all over the place. She goes, yeah, we got your house. And so they provided that, and we gave it to our canvassers. And to make it longer, this was 2 years ago, and this is the first time we got to sit here in Wisconsin. The outcome was amazing. You elected a Supreme Court justice that flipped the Supreme Court. And that is taking redistricting that would hurt Indian country and is doing away with it. In a place where we work together, and went and fought for the local judge district, and a Native got in it, the actual population or the percentage of Natives being arrested and incarcerated for, like, in prison dropped like 40%. You know, and I can tell you that it made a difference in Wisconsin. It made a difference in a lot of lives. We even got people elected in the county commission. We got people elected, you know, within the legislature, not the actual legislature here, but I mean, we were able to help, if not natives, individuals that understood Native issues. And so by working together, we were able to make a difference for our people here in Wisconsin, our brothers and sisters. So being able to work together with other organizations really makes a difference when it comes to getting out the vote and campaigning. So that's why I call her my little sister.
Well, thanks, guys. Before I ask for closing remarks, let me try to synopsize a little bit what everyone's saying. It sounds like we've identified a common antagonist, and that's basically mainstream society. And I think part of the reasons is 2045 is coming, and we've got more natives and more people of color are holding state and federal offices, and that's making dominant society very, very afraid. Fear is a tactic they're using. It's a motivative tactic that they use against our communities in very different ways. To your point, Janine, earlier, you were saying that a lot of these racist strategies are happening in the South, and the South is essentially an incubator for these kind of strategies. And then if it's successful there, it gets spread out to the rest of the country. But a way to deal with that, the intimidation that we see at polling places, for whether it's in your community, Janine, or other communities of color, or in particular on reservation communities.
One second, I gotta do something.
Okay.
I was talking about the Wisconsin vote, and I see she snuck back in. She was the one that was helping Michelle. Raise your hand, please. Michelle was the one that actually ran our GOTV in Wisconsin back in the midterms and helped us set up with bringing the Supreme Court justice before tribal leaders and stuff. And she was also the one that operated the Get Out the Vote throughout Wisconsin during our 2020 midterms. So I wanted to give her a shout out. Okay, now you can go.
Thank you. I'm so used to this. So those are the tactics, right? That's what's being affected to all our communities. But I think you've all brought up very good points on how do we battle those tactics. Number one being is identifying those strategies, right, that are being used against us, and developing tactics to overcome them. Okay, not giving in to that fear that they're trying to impose on us, but rather realizing that all of our communities are beautiful. We all have something to offer to make this world a better place for not just those of us living here now, but for future generations as well. And then even more importantly, getting our community members to advocate to other community members, giving them real reasons that you've all pointed out why it's so important for us to get out there to vote. Knocking down our own stereotypes that we've built up within ourselves, within our own communities, that we've got to knock those down. And probably one of the most important things is allies, those trusted voices that you've all mentioned. Yes, it's important that we all go out and we work within our own communities to get them to try to either register to vote or do whatever, but also don't shut down to other voices, other trusted voices that also might come in that want to be allies. And I think in this world that we're living in today, we can't stay siloed anymore. We've got to be allies. We have to realize that our communities all have something to offer, all are important. And it's good we have our own separate communities, but we also can't be so siloed that we can't band together when issues come up that affect all of us and that could affect us all negatively. Did I kind of catch everything that everybody said? So with that, closing remarks for the audience?
Vote.
Thank you, Janine. In a nutshell.
How do you top that? That's why we're here. Well, I think the one thing to add to is just I'm a huge advocate for young people, for young voters. Fastest growing population in Indian country, and some of the most innovative voices that I have heard in my lifetime. I absolutely love and respect all of the investment that my elders have made into me. But I have two teenagers. I have an 18-year-old that will vote for the first time this year, and I have a 16-year-old that have taught me so much about their perspective in the world and some of the things that they think kind of initiable story media and creative is whole new terms of use and I mean their voice or version of humanity is not stated. They have an idea of what is possible. You know, listening to young people is something that's very important, making sure that they have opportunities to voice their perspectives, and that we're also taking the initiative to have these dinner table conversations about issues that our families individually find important, and getting them out into the community and teaching them what their role is in society, and especially among our relatives from other communities. So I think that that type of solidarity is super important. And yeah, vote.
I will add one other thing, sort of piggybacking on what you just said, is I do think we all have people in our lives who are not, or saying that they're not going to vote. And it can be really easy to just say, well, you know, such and such, they're gonna do what they wanna do. One of my really good friends lives in North Carolina, and she was, you know, she was like, I don't pay attention, I don't watch the news, I don't know what's going on, and I just don't have time. Like, I've got so much stuff going on in my life that I don't have time to think about this. And I asked her, what do you care about? And she said, if you can tell me which one of the candidates actually gives a damn about mental health, because I'm dealing with a child who is going through mental health struggles, and the state keeps failing this child, this, you know, an adult over and over. If you can tell me which candidate will actually have some impact on that, then I'll listen. And I said, bet. And I went and I pulled up some stuff. I talked to her about it. Then I told her how crazy their little lieutenant governor was in North Carolina. It was a funny story. But even being able to do the research, right? Take a little bit of time to do some research for the people that you actually care about. And when I told her that, she was like, well, shoot, now I got to get up and vote. And so we can, you know, like, you don't have to have an entire organization behind you to motivate people to vote. That one person or two people in your lives that you can convince will make a world of difference, because hopefully they'll be able to go out and convince someone else.
Great, thank you. OJ?
I would say know your community. And knowing your community means two things. First of all, you're looking at empowerment. Second, you need to put food on their table at the end of the day. And we, on reservations, especially South Dakota reservations, we're always, the only time we make the top 10 is when it counts poverty, all right? And so we also have to understand that there may be people out there that want to vote, but if they do, they may not have food on their table at the end of the day. So, you know, you gotta balance things out. And you gotta make sure that if you have a relative, you call them, you offer them help, you know, and you get them a gallon of milk, not to vote, but to have food on the table at the end of the day is what most people are striving for in this country. And that not only should you vote, but you should vote smart. If you don't vote smart, it's really going to affect everyone's lives for the next 4 years, or for like ever, depending on what happens here. But that's what I would say. Not only vote, vote smart.
You know, thank you. And one last thing I would really just like to emphasize, which really hit home with me from what you all brought up on the panel, it's the future generations, it's the kids. It's instilling community pride, cultural pride in them, but also instilling in them the importance of participating in governance. Because if they have that pride in themselves and their families and their communities, they're not going to want to take it away. And that's what happens if you don't participate. It could all disappear. So I think it really behooves all of us to focus on our kids, focus on our younger relatives, and getting them involved and helping them understand why the act of voting is so important for not just the survival of this country, but for the survival of our culture, our communities, and our languages. So with that, I want to thank Lucia, Janine, OJ, thank you very, very much for this great and informative panel. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Don. Oh, that's so sad. All right, one.
Where's she at? There she is.
Yay. All right.
That will go up on the website.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Don. That was fun.
And as usual, we're running late, but you know, the next one is so very, very important. And it's with MMIR, Missing Murdered Indigenous Relatives. And the individual here, Wendy Helgamo, was gracious enough to offer to moderate this. This is one thing, and again, we always want to talk about voting. And MMIW or MMIR is important because it's part of voting. We wouldn't have vol right now if we did not push and we did not vote. And so it's an epidemic, it's an atrocity, and I don't think there's any better person to bring it, moderate this panel, and the guests that she has to be on this panel. So with that, Wendy, I'd like to turn this over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, OJ. My name is Wendy Helgamo. I'm a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, one of the federally recognized tribes in Wisconsin. I am honored to be a part of this forum and help with this panel. This panel is seeking justice for and protecting our relatives. We will be talking about issues related to what has been called Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, or MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives, or MMIR. I touch on these various names because of the horrific reality our people endure. People go missing. Searches and investigations are non-existent. Families have no answers, no closure for their relatives. This is an injustice issue. This reality is tied to our history of erasure, the removal of our children from our families through federal Indian boarding school policy, and adoptions outside of our tribes. Our communities are disproportionately affected by high rates of unhoused relatives, sexual and domestic violence, and relatives suffering from substance abuse disorder. Our communities are targeted for trafficking and opioids and fentanyl. So many of our people are seeking justice for our relatives. Abigail Echohawk of the Urban Indian Health Institute within the Seattle Indian Health Board initiated research of the MMIR crisis using public health data from the 12 tribal epidemiology centers from across the country. In 2018, the Seattle Indian Health Board released a groundbreaking report called Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, a snapshot of data from 71 urban cities in the United States. Abigail called and continues to call for national attention to the bureaucratic barriers in data collection, reporting, and analysis of demographic data that perpetuate violence against American Indians and Alaska Native people. And that is from her testimony that she gave to Congress last year. This crisis is on the radar of the United States Congress that has now passed the Not Invisible Act of 2019 and Savannah's Act in 2020. In 2019, President Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13898, establishing the Task Force on Missing and Murdered American Indians and Alaska Natives. We see a growing awareness for our relatives. We see visual artists and days of remembrance with projects such as the Red Dress Project. And then recently we saw a Native actor from Reservation Dogs wear a red handprint on his face at the Emmys. But much more needs to be done so our people are safe. I would like to introduce our panelists, and I'll be going in alphabetical order. Anita Feinday is a member of the White Earth Nation, a federally recognized tribe in Minnesota. She has served as the tribal attorney, chief judge, and was recently an officer at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Through her experience and advocacy, she is an expert on the Indian Child Welfare Act. She served as a member of the U.S. Attorney General's Advisory Committee on American Indian, Alaska Native Children Exposed to Violence, and the Alice Spotted Bear and Walter Sobolov Commission on Native Children. Shannon Holsey is a member of and president of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, a federally recognized tribe in Wisconsin. She has served 5 terms as president and 8 years on the council. She has committed the tribe to serve as good stewards of its economic, environmental, and culture, as well as intellectual resources. She is a demonstrated national leader in Indian country and serves as co-chair of the National Congress of American Indians Violence Against Women Act Task Force and Wisconsin's MMIW Task Force. Jennifer Weddle is the head of the Native American Law Section of Greenberg-Traurig in Denver, Colorado. She serves as counsel to the Coalition of Large Tribes, and she also wanted me to keep her introduction brief because she's been up here a couple times. Jana Williams is a member of the Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe Indians, a federally recognized tribe in Minnesota. She is a former competitive bodybuilder and was inducted into the North American Indigenous Athletic Hall of Fame. Now she is a realtor and makes sure Native communities in Minnesota have access to available grants and programs for leased and trust lands within reservation boundaries. Jana is a committed advocate for social justice. The murder of her niece, Ariana Bakanaga, in 2020, and the senseless and avoidable murder of her niece, Allison Lucier, in 2024, galvanized Jana's involvement in the missing and murdered Indigenous relatives movement and her advocacy for a safer and more equitable future for all. Please help me welcome our panel. So this question is for each of you, and we can start with President Hulsey. Let's start by telling us who you are and why MMIR is important to you.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Wendy had said, my name is Shannon Holsey. I have served my tribal nation for almost 20 years now in various capacities, but near and dear to me is really my own personal story in terms of, you know, I just to have the visibility. You talked, Wendy, about the erasure issue and how we navigate Indian country, but for me, my story is turning my pain into purpose. I too was one of those statistics, and so I felt like the only way that I could really bring pain to purpose was to navigate a system that wasn't necessarily designed for me or with me, but certainly I felt like I had a platform and I had a voice and I had the capability to effectuate change with not only within the dynamics of violence that's imposed on many women and relatives within our tribal communities, but also an opportunity to use that political position that I had to bring awareness and effectuate change, especially because you had talked about, you know, the Savannah Act, the Not Invisible Act, and then certainly most recently, just as recent as 2023, the reauthorization of VAWA. So, you know, when you think about murder being the third leading cause of death among Native women, those statistics are not only glaring, but as you heard the introductions, it's real. When you talk about somebody's relative that was a victim of those circumstances in 2024, it's a telling story that there is so much more work to be done. So for me, my story is very personal, but it's also that of a story of resilience, that I took my painful experience and I moved it to an actionable place where I could use my position and my platform to effectuate change so that we could create safe ways and the ability for tribal nations to exercise their sovereignty and to protect their relatives.
Okay. Is it on? I'll go. My name's Anita Fine-Day, and thank you for, there we go. My name's Anita Fine-Day. Thank you for inviting us here today. As Wendy said, I'm a member of the White Earth Nation in Northwest Minnesota, and I worked there for 14 years as the chief judge. And in that capacity, I saw many of the families who were really struggling, and many of the youth who were struggling. And I saw youth end up in foster homes, and honestly, it wasn't always an improvement. I think going into foster care is really, really difficult for children and youth. But I also saw children in foster care being groomed and being found on the internet. We know that children in foster care are vulnerable, and if they run away, chances are no one is going to look for them because their families don't know they've run away. The agencies don't inform them. And so somehow, people are able to find out who these kids are, get their telephone numbers, and be in contact with them, and entice them, offer them a good life if they will run away and join the ranks of what we know are traffickers. And I saw that happen on the White Earth Reservation repeatedly, and it was really difficult for people to know what to do. The resources were not there, and calling the FBI or calling law enforcement doesn't really get you very far. So I've seen that happen on the reservation, and I think there's been a lot of attention paid to the issue, but we're not there yet where we have really strong solutions. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jana Williams. She did give a brief introduction about me. I don't have a lot of big titles. I am the aunt to 2 murdered nieces in Minneapolis. You know, we all have heard about George Floyd and Minneapolis PD's failings in that situation. What I want to tell you is how my niece was failed and what we have done, where we're at this point, because I believe that Allison's death, her murder, can be the pinnacle of change in the state of Minnesota for statutes, policies, and cultural issues within police departments. And I actually do believe that you guys possibly can learn from what we have done and what I've done, because I second guess myself. Allison was an addict. February 13th, she lived in the North Loop in federally subsidized housing amidst a really affluent area. February 13th, she let her on-again, off-again boyfriend into her apartment about 6:30 p.m. He immediately started beating her, choking her, and she ran to the next door neighbors in her bra and panties. That neighbor let her in. They called 911. The police arrived at 7:03 p.m. that night, Tuesday night, February 13th, 2024. When they got there, Chuck, her partner, was GOA, gone on arrival. And so what they said to them is that call us. If he comes back, we'll come and arrest him, but you only have until midnight to do so on Friday. Because turns out that Minnesota has a statute, a 72-hour statute, minus the first 24 hours, that makes it legal for law enforcement to make an arrest. After that 72 hours, law enforcement or city attorney or county attorney, wherever you live, would actually have to send these things up for charging. So fast forward Friday night, the 16th, which was technically the 17th, she got home a little bit after midnight, and she heard somebody in her apartment, so she knew it was Chuck. She went down to another neighbor's apartment. They called 911. The same 2 officers that arrived on Tuesday night arrived on Friday night. They knew exactly what he had done to her, that he beat her and he choked her. And he had a tendency to tear and rip off her clothes so that she wouldn't run for help, because no female wants to run out naked and for help. That was a way of control. So the 2 officers went upstairs. They found him in her apartment. And instead of arresting him, because he was just picking up a few of his things, this is another issue. This is the cultural issue within Minneapolis PD. They actually train their officers that if a man has articles of clothing in your home or your apartment, he has simply established residency. So he could not have been arrested per Minneapolis PD, because I would have thought he would have been charged with trespassing at that point, right? Minneapolis PD does not train their officers that way. So they let him go. The following day at 5:09 p.m., her sister messaged her, "Hey, Allison, I thought you were coming over today." Allison responds, "I was going to, but I got home last night. They found Chuck in my apartment, and I'm too afraid to leave. I'm too afraid to leave. But I think he's outside stalking me because I ordered a pizza." And he responded to her when the pizza delivery driver got there, "You're lucky that was an effing delivery driver. He's sitting out there stalking her, watching her." Then he messaged her, "If I get arrested for this, it's going to be for something good, so watch your back." And then her sister just said, "Please keep on answering your phone, keep on texting me so that I know that you're okay." And Allison says, "If I don't, then he got me for real, for real." There's another case that is in trial right now in Minneapolis or Minnesota. Madeline Kingsbury. She said the same thing. She knew he was going to kill her. Allison knew Chuck Foss was going to kill her. That was the last time anybody in the family heard from her. They found her deceased when they did a welfare check February 22nd. And I started putting two and two together at her funeral, her wake. And, you know, we didn't know any of these things, but this is where it kind of goes and it gets a little bit interesting because I second-guessed myself, you know, but all of this information that I had in regards to text messages, phone calls, all of this stuff, I knew he had killed her. And the instant during her wake, we found out that this case got passed to homicide. When I found out it was Sergeant Heyer from Minneapolis PD, my heart sunk because he also has my niece Ariana Buckanaga's murder case sitting on his desk. We received one phone call back in 3 years on that one. So at that point, MMIR's office was there, and thank goodness I happen to have friends, Violence Free Minnesota. The gal that's the executive director is from Leech Lake. Minnesota Sexual Assault Coalition, Nicole Matthews, executive director, she's from White Earth. Minneapolis PD, their tribal liaison, Deanna Bolio, Leech Lake. So you know what? I had all of these females that were in my corner. And we started, you know, even though they didn't all know each other, this is where I'm kind of getting with this. Even though we're all there for the same cause, they still did not know each other. And so it kind of went after this. We buried Allison. I called the medical examiner because Sergeant Heyer never responded to me until I staged a march that started at Allison's apartment building and went to the 3rd precinct to call out Sergeant Heyer in this case. And he called me. Actually, I spoke to the medical examiner a few days prior to this march, and the medical examiner told us that she had pulmonary edema in her lungs, which was consistent with a drug overdose, you know? But she also stated that, you know, Minneapolis PD, in the report, it did say that, you know, she had drug paraphernalia, and said, yeah, she was an addict, of course she did. But she also had a subdural hematoma on the left side of her skull. And I asked if that was consistent with the beating that she got on Tuesday the 13th. She said, nope, it wasn't. And so we waited for, basically, they said, well, we're gonna have to wait for the toxicology report to come back, which was gonna take between 6 to 8 weeks. Anyhow, after that staged march, and there was another organization, a couple more really big dogs that came into this fight. It was Indigenous Protector Movement and American Indian Movement. They stepped in with their speakers, their loudspeakers, their banners, and we marched. And they actually set up a meeting with Minneapolis PD, so Chief Gators and Commander Zimmerman. During that meeting at Little Earth, they gave us a little bit of more information that we didn't know. There was a 911 call after Allison's death between the 17th and I think the 22nd, that this Chuck Foss went back to the homeless encampment, was telling somebody that he thought he killed her and he hit her too hard this time. Okay. We waited for 7 weeks, probably 5 weeks after that, for the toxicology report to come back. It came back, she died of a subdural hematoma. She did not die of a drug overdose. Now, the problem with this case is the simple fact that Minneapolis PD failed. They actually didn't pull any of the video camera coverage. So when I told you that I have the proof of him stalking her, they never actually even found her phone. Her phone didn't walk out of the apartment building by itself. They never found her phone. They never pinged her phone, never nothing with this. They didn't pull the video camera coverage in this affluent area because there's video cameras on every street corner, every building, every restaurant. I have documentation of that. Anyhow, I spoke with Senator Kunish at some point here. I met her at a fashion show, and I kind of told her this case, and she started stepping in prior to the toxicology report to come back. And she started kind of putting the pressure on Minneapolis PD, thank God. They started kind of doing more of an investigation. The problem is that these video cameras only hold this footage for 30 days. After the 30 days, it's gone. So I think the biggest takeaway with all of this stuff is that, what I guess I forgot to mention about this, is that Allison had filed OFPs, Orders for Protection, October 23rd of 2023, and then again, November 2nd of 2023, 10 days apart. Because again, Minnesota has state statutes that are archaic. If law enforcement, from the time a victim files an OFP until the time law enforcement serves it is 10 days. If they don't find you in those 10 days, it is null and void, and the female has to start all over again in Allison's case. So our state statutes, our policies, and the culture needs change. Our, my tribal chairman, Chairman Jackson from Leech Lake, actually put me in front of Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, and I spoke to them about Allison's case. And they have now taken up resolutions that Global Rights for Women came into Minneapolis PD. They were called in 2017 to 2022 because they knew that there were issues with domestic violence calls, with the way that Minneapolis PD actually responds to them. They investigated them. They rode along with them for 5 years. They documented all of their findings. And when they said that Minneapolis PD shows up to these DV calls and the suspect is GOA, gone on arrival, which Chuck Foss was, even if he left a minute prior to that, they simply do not go look for the suspect, no matter how bad the violence was bestowed upon the victim, they don't send them up for charging. So, with that being said, is that all of these big organizations that have stood beside me are looking at this, they're watching this, they know that there needs to be change in the state of Minnesota for statutes, these policies, because this isn't just in Minnesota. We know that this is not just in Minnesota. And so I second-guessed myself on this. I know I'm talking long, but the simple fact is that if I wouldn't have done this investigative work, they would never have done it. Currently, Allison's case is sitting on Mary Moriarty's desk, the Hennepin County attorney. Now, what they're stating to us as a family, because we did sit down with them, Indigenous Protector Movement arranged a meeting with the family, with Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and we sat down with them. And during that, Aaron Lutz, the attorney, the prosecutor for this, basically said to us that they could not prosecute this because they didn't have enough evidence, because Minneapolis PD did not do a full investigation on this. They didn't pull the video camera coverage. The stuff that they pulled from the apartment was forced upon them, probably after my march, and after everybody started holding their feet to the fire on this. It's too late. It's 8 months too late to pull the video cameras from any of the buildings surrounding it. They're gone, simply gone. And so now what they're telling us is that Allison's case, or her subdural hematoma, could have been caused by high blood pressure. Not true. The medical examiner is stating, nope, medical impossibility. The doctor from the Mayo that I forwarded the email to them, said it's a medical impossibility. Her subdural hematoma was caused from blunt force trauma. So now we're currently sitting here waiting for charges in this case. You know, I don't think I'm ever going to get it. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get it, but with this, I'm hoping to God that our tribes, our bands can stand strong and stand against the state of Minnesota for statute change and policy change to protect us as Indigenous, actually as every victim in the state of Minnesota, because if we change it for our people, it's going to be changed for everyone. Thank you.
I just really want to honor Jana for everything that she's doing to bring justice for her nieces and sharing that very powerful and painful story with us. You're just very inspiring. And I think all of us have the same answer to Wendy's question, which is this work is important because our people deserve to feel safe in our homes, whether they're in urban areas or it's on our reservations. And emphatically, we don't. The statistics are really staggering. Native women experience a rate of sexual violence 10 times higher than any other population in the United States. 1 in every 3 Native women will be sexually assaulted in her lifetime. These are incredible data that are far outside of any other social norm. And why is that in reservation communities? We don't have public safety. The Oliphant versus Suquamish tribe decision from the US Supreme Court in 1978 stripped tribal governments of the ability to punish non-Indian offenders in our communities. And a whole lot of people have stepped into that and know that they can get away with it when they come to Indian country. And tribal governments have been powerless to do anything. We're also powerless from a financial perspective. Indian country public safety is funded at just 13% of need, according to the Department of the Interior's latest Tribal Law and Order Act report, which is required annually from the department to assess how they're doing on meeting Indian country public safety needs through BIA-OJS. Their most recent report from March of this year analyzes the 2021 funding data, and it finds that to meet just the bare minimum threshold that other rural communities without our jurisdictional challenges need, 2.8 officers per 1,000 people, Indian country needs 26,000 more police officers. All of BIA-OJS has 450 employees in the whole country. We are so far off what it would take to actually make our communities safer. The funding summarized in that same report says we need $3.3 billion as a minimum for Indian country public safety. The latest presidential budget proposal started at $650 million, and we know it'll wind down in the budget appropriations process. So we're not even starting at 20% of the funding we need, and then we do death by paper cuts, and there's just not enough budget. All of BIA is funded at $2.8 billion. So we need a sea change in the advocacy, and that's a lot of the work that Colt is doing now, trying to advocate for that budget change with tribal leaders who also understand that and are trying to fix this fundamentally broken system. And then another large part of the work that I do is helping individual victims and families through Colt in partnership with the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. Our very good friend Mary Catherine Nagel, Dion Kilsbeck, and I have been working on behalf of a Northern Cheyenne woman, LB, who has for the last 9 years been suing the BIA-OJS officer in the United States in a case. LB lives on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. She made a 911 call 9 years ago on a family matter. The responding officer didn't address the 911 matter, asked her if she had been consuming alcohol, basically threatened her with taking away her children if she didn't have sex with him, and raped her in response to the 911 call. He later testified that he'd had sex with at least 12 women while on duty as a BIA OJS officer, and that was all consensual. He would have gotten away with the rape. He said the sex was consensual, but he fathered a child with her, and that's what ultimately caused him to be convicted. There was definitive proof that this had happened, and he went to jail. And LB continued her civil suit and won a $1.8 million judgment in district court in Billings. And the United States has fought that for the last 9 years. We've had 2 trips now to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a trip to the Montana Supreme Court, and the U.S. has continued to deny liability for the officer's conduct, arguing that he was sexually attracted to LB because they had grown up together in the community, and argued that to an all-female panel of judges at the Ninth Circuit. And the chief judge on the panel actually had to explain to the assistant U.S. attorney, making that argument to the court that rape is a crime of violence, not sex. It was pretty stunning to hear a representative of the United States describe LB is so undeserving of justice. Since we won at the Ninth Circuit, shortly thereafter, the U.S. has still refused to settle the case and is denying discovery in the effort to enforce that judgment, saying the officer's discipline records should not be available and his personal psychological records should not be available. It's really stunning to see the U.S. and Attorney General Merrick Garland so often say good words, but do nothing to uphold those words in practice.
So this question is for Anita. This crisis comes at us after a long history of genocide and violence towards our people. Can you talk about intergenerational trauma and how can we protect our young people?
Thank you for that. One of the things that I wanted to mention to folks is something called the Native Children's Commission. And this is a commission that was created by bipartisan legislation. It seems like it was a really long time ago, but it was only in 2016 that Senator Heitkamp, who's a Democrat from North Dakota, and Senator Murkowski, who's a Republican from Alaska, got together and decided that there needed to be a place where data and best practices could be gathered and kept. And so they got legislation through the US Congress to create this Native Children's Commission, and I was honored to serve on this commission. It was an 11-member commission that included experts in education, juvenile justice, child welfare, social services, and mental and physical health. And I won't go into a lot of detail about it, but I will say that you can find the report at commissiononnativechildren.org. And it just came out, the report just came out earlier this year. It's 300 pages. But it has a lot of really great data and a lot of stories about programs and services that are working, and talks about intergenerational trauma and the impacts that this trauma has had on our communities. And I wanted to mention that Commission on Native Children and the trauma that was documented, and I wanted to link that to, as I'm sure most of you know, that there have been listening sessions throughout Indian country about boarding schools. And I mentioned the bipartisan effort because we need bipartisan efforts, right? We need people to come together to be solutions focused. And so we know that there have been listening sessions around the country about boarding schools and about the impact that boarding schools have had on Native people. My mother was a boarding school survivor, and my grandmother was a boarding school survivor. My mother was taken at age 4 from the White Earth Indian Reservation, and she was taken to the Wahpeton boarding school at age 4. She did not see her parents again until the next summer, so she, at age 4, was being raised by strangers. So this has impacted Native people in many ways that we realize, and probably many ways that we don't realize. So there have been listening sessions around the country about boarding schools, and the next thing that needs to happen is we need to have a commission on boarding schools that can document. We need to know exactly how many boarding schools were there, and we need to have a commission that can hold hearings. So far, we've only had listening sessions, and we do have a lot of information that has been gathered, but we need a commission that can hold official hearings and create official documents and issue an official report by the federal government. So that is something that the groundwork has been laid, but that needs to happen, and a bipartisan effort would be really great to talk about intergenerational trauma, and that still plays out in Indian country today.
President Holsey, this question is for you. Tell us what is happening in Indian country, and it's a similar question in how can tribal leaders and our allies protect our people?
Well, I think, obviously, as I had said earlier, tribal sovereign nations are also political bodies, and we institute consultation as much as like she described in terms of that. So obviously, we just come on the other side of a pandemic, and absent that, as just expounded, when you look at that just recently, the reauthorization of VAWA after a number of years was just reauthorized in 2023. And as expressed here, there are so many limitations for so many reasons, but with that reauthorization, you heard the advocacy of specifically Senator Murkowski too, because absent 2023, Alaska and Maine were not included in that. And we know that when you look at those statistics, there is significant numbers, especially at the rates of domestic violence and stalking and other things, especially in Alaska. So our relatives in Alaska and Maine were not even included in that. And then when you look at the appropriations as expressed, that's a large part of it. So when you look at that and you're consulting numerous federal agencies, it's extremely difficult. You heard Attorney General Merrick Garland discussed and what can we do, and I think there's a great deal of frustration of how, as tribal nations, we excise that. We try to, what I appreciate up here today is the diversity of just subject matter expertise and their lived experience, and how they've taken that lived experience. And many of the initiatives in Indian country actually started at the grassroots level. They weren't actually instituted. They were in various ways through Department of Justice and other core areas. But it really was by our sisters and our relatives that really started these grassroots initiatives, because they were tired about not getting the media attention and the invisibility around us, and then the lack of value that was placed on us. And it's still happening today, and it's in multiple jurisdictions. And then you compound that with jurisdictional issues. You talked about your sister, Mary Catherine Nagel, who we work closely with. She also serves on our VAWA task force, and we've talked about, various legislative fixes to the ongoing issues. But we also have to keep in mind, as people, as nations that as sovereign nations that self-govern, everybody has different ways of self-governance and how that looks. But when you look at it through sort of the lens of criminal justice, you know, and victimization, you have to look at it because for centuries, you know, our tribes have been plagued with gross underfunding. That's one of it. You know, we all have really good intentions and we obviously know what to do, but when you don't have the support of your federal trust partner in administering the necessary resources that are needed within our tribal communities just to bring minimum levels of safety, it's exceedingly frustrating. And then you compound that with the idea that you're not just dealing with one federal agency partner, you're dealing with multiple federal agency partners, and then you drill that down to state agency partners and then others, like you were talking about, you know, Minnesota, Minneapolis, and the broader good. So, you know, it's a lot to navigate, but, you know, I would say that the optimistic side of me says that Indian country has incredible people, from people who are technical in nature and people that have really extensive legal experience in how to navigate these systems. But to the point made earlier too, but it's coupled with the idea that those initiatives and those areas of awareness were created from grassroots initiatives by our people. And I think that's what's different about this is because they are guiding and leading these charges with fixes, but it starts with re-engaging our federal agency partners and state partners about streamlining processes, looking at ways that we can create continuity without creating more complexity in systems that we have to navigate, and you know, making things more singular. And it starts with jurisdiction. It starts about recognizing our sovereignty and our capabilities of bringing safety to our communities. But it has broad spectrum from mental health to human services to law enforcement to the Department of Justice to the Department of Interior, and I could go on, but it is so complex. It's a complex system. But the other part is I will say too, is we need more engagement by tribal leadership across Indian country to engage in this issue, because really they're the people that are going in and day out that get the opportunity and the platform to consult our federal agency partners to effectuate that change. So we really have to continue to push the needle and to advocate, saying we need, this is not an Indigenous women's problem, this is an everybody's problem, and it requires all of us to be engaged and to enlist and to help lift that issue up and bring awareness around our relatives.
This question is for Jana. You talked at great length about the failures of the Minneapolis Police Department, but we know that this is a systematic issue from studies like Abigail Echo-Hawk's research that she's done across the country. So what do you see as next steps, or how do we hold police departments accountable wherever our people are?
First of all, I think we show up. We are such a small percent of the population. When we stage these protests, when we have these issues, you know what we need? We need the numbers. We need everybody to show up. I can't just have 10 people. You know, if you have a niece that's missing, somebody that's missing, Nevaeh Kingbird is missing. I went up there to her, they had a memorial or a candlelight vigil for her. Show up. This is what we need. We need absolutely every single tribal chair to show up. We need this tribal secretary. We need our bands to stand together and our people to stand together. Here is a for instance. You know, we're afraid. We're afraid to use our voices. We're afraid to take that stand. We can't do that anymore. I refuse to remain silent. If I would have remained silent, this case would never have gone anywhere. You know, like I said, I was hesitant for 1 minute. The night prior to my first protest, my first march, I almost called it off. You know what? That would not have gotten me anywhere. I would have been standing here completely by myself. My niece's case would not have been on Hennepin County Attorney's desk. You know what? Senator Kunish messaged me, our state senator. She's from Standing Rock. She actually was one of the driving forces to get that MMIR office in Minnesota, and she was the driving force to push Minneapolis PD to send her case up for charging. Now, she's in contact with Hennepin County Attorney's Office, and Hennepin County Attorney's Office is in touch with our own senator, stating that she knows how very poorly Minneapolis PD treated this case from the very get-go. Okay, now what? How many cases is this happening to? How many of our relatives is this happening to? This case right here can be the pinnacle for change, but I need voices. We need the voices. We need to stand together as one. This is the bottom line. We have to have a coalition. And you know, the things that I really wish that I would have known then, what I know now, I wish I would have called for a second autopsy. Nobody in Indian country knows where to go for this. Do you guys know? Turns out there's an organization that Colin Kaepernick started. It's called Know Your Rights Camp. I could have applied for a grant for a second autopsy. I found this out with this reinvestigation work group because I talk and I talk and I talk and I talk to everyone that I know, I come across, and they keep on giving me all of these ideas. My hope for this is even going to be bigger than the statute and the policy change. I eventually want the DOJ, the Department of Justice, to come in and open up every single one of our cases. So Violence Free Minnesota, they actually started a whole new subcategory for suspicious deaths because of Allison's murder. The state of California, I think it was a few weeks ago, they actually passed into law that if there's a family that questions whether or not the suspicious death and law enforcement didn't do an investigation, they passed into law that the family can question it and say, we want an investigation. I can't remember the woman's name, but it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago that this girl was murdered by her partner when law enforcement claimed it was a suicide. Well, it wasn't. So these are the things that we need to really start having. You know, we need to start having these conversations and having a coalition where everybody has all of this information at hand right in front of them. Because when somebody goes missing, who do you call? Law enforcement? They're going to come out and do what? You know what? Allison had 7 documented 911 calls, 5 of which should have been automatic felonies because this idiot was on the enhanced list. He'd already been charged with domestic violence assaults. He was on the enhanced list. This monster chained her to a toilet, tortured her for days on end. It was never sent up for charging. She called the police. Now what? If a native calls the police, you're crying out for help. She cried out for help. She doesn't have a voice anymore. We have got to be the voices that are unheard and unseen because they're not strong enough to have those voices. There are some of which that we are, you know, but we've got to use them. And like I say, we've all got to band together and make our voices heard.
Jennifer, is there anything else that you can touch on that may or may not be happening in Washington, D.C.?
So 2 things. One is a very comprehensive public safety proposal, which has now been adopted by every major intertribal organization. That was carried by Colt at the NCAI annual convention in 2022. It outlines draft legislation that would undo Oliphant, would restore tribal court jurisdiction over non-members, increases sentencing authority for tribal courts, and makes clear that any state exercise of jurisdiction would be by agreement between tribes and states and done on a cooperative basis. We're trying to gain traction around getting that introduced, and I think we're getting closer. in large part because of the strong advocacy from leaders like the folks on this stage who keep going to Washington, and these statistics aren't changing. No matter how many reports and needs assessments are done, there's no action. And so the other big thing that needs to change is the U.S. Department of Justice, which is just a crap show. Even in this administration, which has been so great for tribes in so many other ways, there's not been a single Native American political appointee at DOJ in this administration. They've had incredibly offensive suggestions that potential appointees should report to careers in a way that never happens in any other area of the department. They keep pointing to, $5,000, $10,000 Office of Violence Against Women grants, and tribes get these, small grants, and then what good is it? You don't have permanent funding to back that up, so you establish a program, and then what happens? There's nothing systematic. For the U.S. attorneys' offices that function within the Department of Justice, they don't control their own budgets. And there's no one section of DOJ that controls an Indian country budget. So even if you're the U.S. attorney for a state like Montana and you have a lot of Indian country and a lot of Indians, you don't get any more funding for that, or specific funding or resources. And it's more than 1/3 of the violent crimes prosecuted by U.S. attorneys are Indian country cases. And yet we're certainly not 1/3 of their violent crime funding. So we've recommended lots of policy changes to create an Office of Treaty Rights Enforcement at US DOJ, to create a special advisor who has regular access to the Attorney General, who could comment and help streamline these policies, and then a dedicated funding stream so that Indians aren't just in environment and natural resources or over here in criminal, but rather there's one assistant attorney general with real budget authority and accountability to say, yes, this is my budget, and here's how I'm going to keep Indian country safe, rather than constantly pointing the finger at somebody else in DC. Go see the appropriators, go see Interior, go see the White House, go see OMB. Tribal leaders are sick of that, and that's why we need centralized, accountable people, and we can say, if you're going to help us, we vote for you.
This is just for each of you, if you would like to talk about this. These issues are hard and challenging. How do you stay strong and continue to do this work?
For me, it is difficult. And as I had spoken about earlier, you sort of take that, as somebody who is a victim of that circumstance, and you move that pain to purpose. It's easy when you look at the landscape that's been described today, and you look at the overture of our tribal communities and the significant challenges we have, and it gives perspective. And, to my sister's point, when you think about it, and a group of people who consist of less than 1 or 2% of the total population, when you think of that as the first people of these lands, and you think about the lack of value that's placed upon us, but yet we endeavor, you have to remind yourself about the resiliency and the platform and the job that's been given, and you have to look at it as an honorable one. And you, as difficult as that is, it's sort of hard to navigate a system where it's very emotionally led, because as described, it's not like that. When you are before key decision makers or federal agencies or even state agencies trying to tell our stories, it's always coupled with statistics, and it comes down to resources, and it comes down to how they manage our time. With over 574 tribal nations collectively in the United States, it's a difficult and insurmountable task for anyone. But for tribal nations, you just have to continue to endeavor, because our citizens matter. We don't see things monetize our citizens. We see them as human beings. We see them as something that contributes to the betterment of our whole and to the health and wellness of our tribal communities. So the value placed upon them and the significant advocacy that's needed is never hard to do. When you when you couple that with those things, you realize that it's an honor and a blessing to be able to have those platforms to navigate, to advocate, and to make sure that, as given that honor, that you continue to endeavor, although not easy. And it's not easy to hear the stories, but you have to learn how to tell them so that you can bring visibility around who we are, so that we can be seen and heard, and so that we can hold those trust partners to their federal responsibilities. And so it's going to continue to take all of us, and it's going to continue to tell our story. It's going to continue for us to endeavor and create those statistics and effectuate laws and priorities within our tribal communities. So it's not an easy answer, and it's not ever going to get easy, but the one thing I think what's so beautiful about what everyone up here does, and many of you out there and in your tribal communities, is we always err on the side of humanizing things, and we never forget about our relatives, and we never forget the importance of advocating for them, and about the boarding school experience she talked about, and the centuries of atrocities that our people have endured since 1492. We can't forget that, and we have to continue to educate people around who we are, but from a lens of resiliency and strategy, and one that we will never stop until we have safety within our communities.
I think one of the other panels mentioned how young Indian country is, and I take great solace in our youth. And I've seen Native youth at work, and they have great ideas, they have a lot of energy, and I really believe that Native youth are going to have the solutions and are going to be able to make a lot of headway. We've been working for a long time, and we have made progress, but I think that Native youth are going to really, they're going to be the answer, and they're going to find solutions to a lot of the issues that we are grappling with today.
I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice not to have a voice for those that are voiceless. There's far too many of us that are gone already. I wish I wasn't in this position. When my first niece was murdered, she was 18. We have very few answers and no justice for either. I don't want to be in this position. What gives me strength and hope and power is when people reach out to me. I had Allison's cousin reach out to me yesterday and thank me. He lost his son in 2020. He was murdered in Minneapolis also. He got justice for that one. But he couldn't stay in the fight. He couldn't fight this fight with me. Now he can. Now he's strong enough because that murderer got justice for his son. He'll never get him back. But I think, like for me, what my biggest goal is, and what the reason why I stay in this fight is because there are far too many that are afraid to have that voice. And we have got to stand up every chance that we get and go against what law enforcement is stating and not believing everything that they're saying to us. Because in this case, I wasn't wrong. Everybody's looking at this. They know, the senator is even saying, Hennepin County Attorney's Office, everybody is saying, Jana, you're right. Now we can't charge us because they screwed up. Well, great. How many more of our relatives have to go missing or murdered without justice? We need to start standing up. And then, you know what? This is the Native Vote Forum. We have got to vote in who we need, who is going to stand up for us. Senator Kunish, Peggy Flanagan. You know what? Those are huge advocates for us in the state of Minnesota. We need to start voting in people that are going to stand with us and have our voices alongside us. You know, like I said, we don't have this choice. I don't have a choice, and you don't have a choice.
I guess I would conclude by saying the strength comes from the fact that we're all in this together. And that includes the great tribal leaders out in the audience. It includes folks working in any administration, all the natives who are willing to go to DC and be away from their families and take on the incredible burden that that takes. All the allies that are out there as well. And I want to just take a moment to also thank all the leaders who've come before us who've been doing this work for so long. Wendy's mom, Marlene, was certainly one of them. Cecilia Fire Thunder, Trish Tingle. There's so many women who've been fighting this for a long time, and men as well. And that it means that we have to be everywhere and have our tentacles in every aspect of the federal government, working with the tribal governments to finally fix this and get it right exactly the way that our ancestors envisioned when they negotiated these provisions, the Badman provisions in our treaties. The United States has an obligation to ensure public safety in Indian country, and we together can make them live up to it.
That concludes our panel today. Thank you very much to each of you for coming up here and sharing your life experiences and your expertise and your ideas for moving forward for the future and protecting our people. Thank you.
All right, we've had a very long day, but I really think it was very informative. And what I would like you to think about is, I mean, we had topics on boarding school, we had topics on Buffalo, we had topics on MMIRs, or relatives. And every one of them that you've heard all comes back to one thing: voting. These things have been fought for over and over for hundreds and hundreds of years. And some of them, yeah, maybe the past 50, maybe the past 20, it finally became recognized. But each and every one of these can be addressed by knowing and voting smart and educating those people running for Congress. Now, we have a half a day tomorrow. It's going to be a very interesting day. We're going to take and break down the data for Indian country as far as what's been going on in Indian country, what kind of voters turnout do we have, what is a big difference and why it's really important for us to vote. So I hope you all find time to come here tomorrow. We'll be done by noon. We'll have breakfast in the morning. I hope you come and have breakfast. Then we'll have a boxed lunch.